Hello guys. Welcome to my channel, Arcane Nets, um, where we'll have the opportunity to go into the firewalls, in detail, um, the PaloAlto firewall, the FortiGate, and any other next generation firewall. Um, for today, we might just go through um, just the basic understanding of what the firewall does and then subsequently develop on that. So for today, it's just going to be an introduction to um, to what the firewall does on the network, how important the firewall is. Uh, I mean, knowing that there are so many other devices um, that are on the network. In other words, the firewall is not just the only device or the only devices or appliances um, that are on the network. There's so many other things. We have the load balancer, we have the proxy, we have so many things. But the firewall is seems to be that first point of contact on the network. And so we will go into the details and explain what the firewall does and how traffic has been processed and all that. The topology I have right now is, we may have to wipe it clean and uh, uh, build it from start when we go deep into the firewall configuration. From the initial configuration of the firewall to um, assigning manage my IP address to the management, assigning the interfaces, making your configuration, and what have you. So basically, without wasting your time, so the Palo Alto firewall seems to be, I call it the best firewall. That is not just an hyperbole. It's not just me trying to make it up. Before the existence of Palo, there were other firewalls like the Checkpoint, um, you know, Cisco firewalls and all that. Before the introduction of the Palo Alto firewall, and ever since the existence of Palo Alto firewall, it is really been that number one firewall that a lot of companies are using on the network. Um, the Palo, like I said, is part of the next generation firewall or firewalls. I will put it that way. In the older days, we have what we call the traditional the the traditional firewall, right? And now we have what we call the next generation firewall. I can basically argue that even though when we talk about the next generation, I mean the traditional firewall like the legacy firewall and all that, they're more into packet filtering, right? This firewall is into more into packet filtering, right? Though I mean, if you understand the concept about access control and all that, if you're familiar with that, you understand what I'm trying to say when it comes to packet filtering. This doesn't mean that we do not have rules in the firewall that allow or deny access to, I mean, from a software destination. But it's into more of a packet filtering, and its processing is up to, to the layer 3 in the OSI model. Um, but when we talk about next generation firewall, which is our main focus for today, um, we believe that for the Palo Alto firewall, it's processing stuff to the layer 7 processing, which is the application, and it's into more of a stateful firewall than a packet filter firewall. And maybe we can start understanding of what a next generation firewall is by the word stateful. So let's assume there are for a start, I would say that the firewall is the middleman. It's just like you having to build a house, and you have like a gate man who serves as a security, uh, you know, and whoever comes in or goes out, it controls that, right? Whoever comes in, he has the questions and making sure that you're allowed to be in the premises, and whoever needs to go out, we have to get out, kind of open the door, like checking in and checking out to be sure that what is allowed is whoever comes into that building has to has the right to be, or has the right to be in that building, and whoever needs to go out you know can leave. So that is the logically what the firewall does. So the firewall is the middleman between the bad guys and your organization. When we talk about the bad guys, we're talking about the hackers all over the world who are more interested in harming um, your network, or serves as more like a threat to your network. Um, that is what the firewall stands for, to be able to protect you from the bad guys. Um, so for instance, we can take this particular Palo firewall. Like I said, this is just an explanation, so I can definitely let me just take all these guys out, and we do not need any of this for now. We can take all these guys out. Okay, we can leave this guy. Um, we can just leave some other stuff here. I can just for from sort of explain just for me to explain to you what we intend to do today. So we can take a lot of these things out so you don't get confused. And yeah. So basically, this is what we try to say. Um, this is more like a typical network, where you have your firewall that is starting to protect your organization, right? So, and this is what happens. Like the Palo Alto firewall, like you said, is one of the stateful firewalls out there. When what we meant by stateful is this. So before I can go into this, let me just kind of explain to you, the concept about the Palo Alto firewall. So in the Palo Alto firewall, right? Um, for those of us who are not new to this, or for those who are, you know what we meant when we say one, which is what we call the wide area network, and you should know what we meant by saying and, which is the local area network. These are just names, right? The Palo Alto, named this as on trust, right? And they call these as trust, right? So the concept about the firewall, regardless of being a Palo or any other firewall, but here we're talking about Palo, is that um, I mean, there's a need for us to also deal with when it comes to the zero trust. Um, but there's going to be later on. But now let's just understand the fundamental or how the firewall functions, right? So now, um, in a real world, right, everyone that resides right here outside the network is considered as a threat. Everyone that resides is considered as a threat because, right, this is where the bad guys, operate from. This is where the bad guy operates from. But that doesn't mean that that concept doesn't change. I mean, that concept changes when we talk about zero trust, but we're not talking about zero trust now. We're just like getting an understanding of how the firewall of functions. So now the concept about that everyone who resides outside this network is considered as a threat, right? So we are saying that how do we protect against these bad guys not to be harmful on our network, right? not to harm our network. What do we need to do to make sure that these guys, the bad guys there, are restricted from becoming a threat on our network, right? What can we do? Now, in the recent, the way the network functions is by means of IP addresses. We talk about, where you talk about your source IP, you talk about your destination IP, you talk about whatever port that this particular traffic needs to run on and all that, right? So, and the way we have a way to at least control these guys. There's so many ways. One of the ways that we control these guys from being harmful is by some sort of rules in the firewall. This rule is what validates any kind of traffic that traverses on your network. In other words, when a rule is implemented in the firewall, this will kind of validate or give authority to what needs to go out or what needs to come in. So that's the way that the PaloAlto firewall functions, and all of the firewalls, right? So um, so the firewall is the middleman, on your network, that is there to prevent these bad guys from being harmful on your network or to your network. So it's the middleman. And we said, and I just said that the way the firewall does that is by means of rules. So in other words, when in other words, the firewall has the ability to accept and deny a request. Right. We maybe in the process of us talking, there we speak. Well, there's a need for us to talk about the stages of these firewalls and all that. But now we're just talking about what the firewall does. So, uh, like we tried to say the other time that earlier on, that in the traditional firewall, the legacy firewall is into more like packet filtering, right? Before the introduction of the next generation firewalls, which Palo Alto is one of them. And Palo Alto kind of stand out because the Palo Alto has a way of controlling the network through some sort of restriction by application. The in the olden, like the traditional firewall has more like the HTTPS and more like the services, which is basically more of a blanket configuration on the network. So with the Palo Alto firewall, the Palo Alto has a way of restricting by means of application, is instead of using like the services and all that. So, and then we said something about the stateful. What makes next generation firewall a stateful firewall is that, like we rightly said, that for anything to go in and out of your network, that has to be controlled by some certain rules, right? And rules we're talking about from a source to a destination and wherever port number or application they have to travel on. So, for instance, let me break it down here. So that. Let's assume that that so what makes this guy a stateful firewall? Stateful, right? Is this within this Palo, we believe that take for instance, if a 10.0.0.9 needs to access the internet, right? We believe that there has to be a rule within this firewall that is going to give access to this guy to access the internet. And that means the action that will be implemented if this gets to be granted access will be to allow such access to, let's say, 4.2.2.2, right? Okay, so now what makes the firewall stateful is this: for any kind of section are basically just packets that goes in and out of of your network. That's just traffic that goes in and out. That's just the logical way of just explaining it. So what happens is this. So if to say for instance that if a 10.0.0.9 needs to go to the internet, it comes this way, it comes this way, it comes this way, and picks up that particular traffic, and that means that traffic will have to be allowed by a rule in the firewall, right? And before before we can send it to where it needs to go. At that moment, it's what makes the firewall to be a stateful firewall. So that means for each session, regardless of which direction that session is coming from, that session has to match a particular rule in the firewall before it can be a stateful. For it to be stateful. So that's just a concept about this. So like I said, the more the traditional firewall are more into packet filtering, and while the next generation firewall are more into stateful firewall. That doesn't mean that though that the next generation firewall were not controlled by some set of rules in the firewall. Um, so that's just, what we need to establish. So um, so one other thing that I just want to say also is that when we talk about the stateful firewall, and I remember I just said something about section and all of that. So, say for instance, we have this as a source, and we have maybe like 4.2.2.2 as a destination, right? So, what happens is this: the firewall has a rule that says source IP a source IP, which is a 10.0.0.9, needs to go to a destination of 4.2.2.2, right? And they have to run on what port? Maybe port 80, right? These will be stated here in the firewall. So when this guy leaves to go to 4.2.2, this is what is going to present to the firewall, right? Now, also, when this guy when 4.2.2 needs to return such request, because this guy is the one making a request to 4.2.2, so there has to be a corresponding packet for there to be a three-way handshake for that particular session to be established, right? So now at that point 4.2.2 becomes what? The source, right? And the destination, right? I would have loved to say the destination would be like a 10.0.0.9, but it does not work that way, because 4.2.2 may not is not going to we not remember a 4.9.9. Yeah, it will rather use whatever's source NAT that source has to make that request. What I'm trying to say is that there's what we call a pre-NAT and a post-NAT. Right. So, but maybe for today we just maybe I don't, because there's a need for us to go into some sort of explanation into that. So what happens is this. So when the firewall present this, when this guy presents this request to the firewall, hey, my name is this, and I need to go to this, and I need to travel on this. If there's a rule that allows this guy, is allowed to go, and there has to be a corresponding packet also that allows the 4.2.2 inside. I mean, if we have a rule that allows it in, then we should have a rule. I mean, we have a rule that allows that to go outside. I mean, for an inbound rule. I mean, for an outbound rule, then technically we should, we expect that the rules should also grant an inbound traffic, right? So for there to be the three-way handshake on this network, the destination for the two has to you know return that request back to the 10.9.9.0. But knowing that the 10.9.9.0 we not the destination itself is not going to recognize the 4.2.2 will not recognize 10.9 at 10.0.0.9, right? But it's going to recognize whatever external IP that 10.0.0.9 it's operating on. But it's the story for another day, right? But I just want us to understand how the firewall operates and what makes it stateful. So the point that makes this firewall to be stateful is that when this request is made and these matches a rule in the firewall, that is the moment it becomes a stateful. But if this was to be like a 4.2.2.2 and the firewall does not have any configuration for that, then it drops it. So for any packet for the then generator firewall to be stateful, wherever request or section that is being sent from a source, right, has to match a particular rule in the firewall before it can get to the destination. So that's a concept about that. And we also need to understand before we end this class, also that the firewall, the PaloAlto firewall, although other firewalls, I would say basically operates through the interfaces. They operate through the interfaces. Here we'll talk about. I was trying to bring this one. We'll talk about um, the vWire interface, the virtual wire interface, the layer 2, the layer 3, how we can combine a layer 2 interface into a layer 3 interface to the VLAN interface. We'll talk about all that. So the PaloAlto firewall also operates on the basis of interfaces and zones. Zone is just like an identity for us to be able to know from what zone is a particular packet coming from and from what zone is that particular packet heading to. And that is what the zone is just for. It's just a name that we give on the network. Palo consider every traffic coming from the outside was I don't trust, and a lot of people can call it external. We can call it one. Just these are just names, right? And there Palo also consider that anything that is within your network, is to be trusted, which some people call it inside traffic or inside network, or you call it LAN, your local area network. These are just names, right? And you also have the DMZ, which we'll talk, some other time. So this is just basically what is exactly going on here, is that we identify the flow of packet by zones. Like, okay, maybe this 10.0.0.9 is coming from the trusted, and it's going to the untrusted zone. So it's just like more like an identity on the network to see how certain packet is the flow of certain packets. And like I said, these packets could go through what we call the V wire, which we call the virtual wire interface, or the layer 2, or the layer 3. We will have to talk about all these interfaces in PaloAlto firewall does, and just like one of those next generation firewalls out there who as ourselves as the middleman between you and the bad guys. So we'll go into deep analysis of this deep analysis into this firewall. Maybe in our next class we have to go into some sort of configuration, try to go into the Palo and learn one or two things, and also explain what interfaces, the type of interfaces we have configured there, and how we can go on from there. Thank you, and if I have any other question, you can please reach out to me. Thank you, and until we see again.